Pressure. Down he goes. Leslie O'Neal, one of the all-time greats in the sack department.
We told you about him. There he is. Leslie O'Neal, big number 91.
Elway's dropped to the 10. Leslie O'Neal got him.
He played tight end. He wanted to play some tight end for me at Oklahoma State. And I said, Leslie, I don't know. How about defensive line? He said, no, sir.
Leslie's on him. They got him by the coattail, and down he goes. Leslie O'Neal, number 99.
That's O'Neal that ran him down. The speed of Leslie O'Neal.
Leslie O'Neal is one of the premier tackles in college football, and he's a force.
San Diego selects defensive end Leslie O'Neal from Oklahoma State.
O'Neal off major surgery, out for a year. Many people feeling he'd never return to the game is now returning to his original form.
Four-man rush, and he is smothered.
O'Neal again.
Leslie O'Neal, that is his 4th sack of the ballgame.
Leslie O'Neal.
He's a great player, and he leads by example.
Leslie O'Neal got him at the 16.
There's a lot of controversy where Leslie's concerned. Some people he has to be able to get along with, but one thing nobody debates is the fact that he is all football player.
Jeff George has to scramble. Oh, good grief. And Marty Scheidenhammer told me yesterday that O'Neal might be the best ever to play the position.
And Leslie O'Neal picks up his 133rd sack of his career. Now in 6th place in NFL history.
I would say that I'm a hustler. I like to be around the ball. I like to make things happen.
Let's jog your memory. The story of Leslie O'Neal begins in Little Rock, Arkansas, and his football dreams grew to fruition at Hall High School. It was there where O'Neal became a dominant force, playing both tight end and defensive line. During his senior year, he would be named to the Associated Press Super Team as a D lineman. When it came time for college, O'Neal went one state over and accepted a scholarship to play for Oklahoma State. And while O'Neal was coveted as a D lineman, he wanted to play tight end. At 6'5" and just 210 pounds, that seemed like a better fit. But Cowboys coach Jimmy Johnson knew that Leslie was a pass rusher.
He played tight end. He wanted to play some tight end for me at Oklahoma State. And I said, Leslie, I don't know. How about defensive line? He said, no, sir. He said, I'm going to catch passes. Took me about 6 months to convince Leslie he needed to play defense.
However, O'Neal's freshman year in Stillwater was pretty uneventful. A reserve with a lot to learn, totaling just 6 tackles. But come his sophomore season, O'Neal was a starter. Still far from the biggest lineman, but he had added around 15 pounds. He also ran a 4.7, and he'd be in the backfield before the offense could even react.
Again, gambling defense.
Great defensive play by O'Neal there.
In 1982, the Cowboys defense had the worst turnover ratio in the nation, but with some creative changes from Johnson, that would be a thing of the past. On top of O'Neal, he had taken backup QB Adam Hines and moved him to free safety. He knew what he was doing. The 83 iteration of the Cowboys D was scary fast. They converged on the ball in an instant and led the nation with 53 total turnovers. O'Neal led the Big 8 in tackles for loss.
I'll tell you, if you think we've called Leslie O'Neal's name a lot, you're right.
En route to a first-team all-conference selection, his smaller size proving to be more of an advantage. He was agile, his footwork was great, and he understood the game. And the best part was that he was only going to get better. On the offensive side of the ball, an attack led by QB Rusty Hilger and tailback Sean Jones pulled their weight enough for the Cowboys to win 8 games and get a bid to the Blue Bonnet Bowl. O'Neal made his presence felt against Baylor.
Right down the sideline. Down he goes. Leslie O'Neal, number 99.
And Oklahoma State secured their first bowl win in nearly a decade. These Cowboys were contenders, but they were about to lose their leader. After the season, Jimmy Johnson announced he was leaving. A coaching job at Miami was too good to pass up, but he had put all the pieces in place. And now promoted head coach Pat Jones just had to keep it going. And in 1984, the OSU defense only got better. Once again, they were churning out turnovers. No pass was safe with guys like Hines and All-American Rod Brown. Their D-line was dominant, and opposing QBs were making a lot of their passes under duress, mostly because number 99 was coming.
Here's Sights back again. Look out. In trouble. Down he goes. You know what it is, don't you? Who is it? Leslie. O'Neal, again, is just shedding his blockers.
That's O'Neal that ran him down. The speed of Leslie O'Neal.
O'Neal has that trait that makes him a great football player. Quick, how quick he comes off the ball. He never gets stuck on the block.
Leslie O'Neal was a game wrecker, blowing up play after play with his penetration.
And when you run into Leslie O'Neal, ladies and gentlemen, you stop.
And getting very familiar with every quarterback he faced.
Pressure's on him, they got him by the coattail, and down he goes, Leslie O'Neal, number 99.
One man was rarely enough to stop O'Neal. Not even kickers were safe from his outstretched arms.
This one should be down the middle.
Oh, block, and that's blocked. That looks like O'Neal again that did it.
It was.
Leslie O'Neal was a superstar, one of the nation's best pass rushers. For the season, he racked up a program record 16 sacks and was named the Big 8 Defensive Player of the Year and a first-team All-American, an anchor for one of the top defenses in the nation. And their offense had improved as well, thanks in large part to an impressive freshman, a running back named Thurman Thomas. The loss of Jimmy Johnson didn't seem to have any ill effect. They went into the Bedlam Battle ranked number 3 in the nation, the highest in program history.
And coming into Owen Field at Roman, the Cowboys of Oklahoma State with a record of 9-1, ranked 3rd in the nation. Their only loss to Nebraska. Coach Pat Jones, first season, no Oklahoma State football team has ever won 10 games.
O'Neal saved his best for last. 13 total tackles, 3 QB sacks. Oklahoma had no answer for him. However, the Sooners came out on top. OSU's national championship hopes ended with yet another loss to their bitter rival. But with a 9-2 record, they got a bid to the Gator Bowl. South Carolina was their final opponent. A victory would result in the first 10-win season in program history. And late in the game, OSU secured that win in dramatic fashion.
Inside the 10-yard line, and Hanna tries to pull his way in and does for a touchdown. Great effort by Barry Hanna.
2 straight bowl wins and the best season in school history. Leslie O'Neal was one of the best players in college football. The Pokes were losing a lot on offense, but with a defense like theirs, anything could happen in 1985. OSU's defense was still top tier, forcing turnovers, getting penetration. Nose guard John Washington took a lot of pressure off O'Neal, and every coach had their hands full.
Leslie O'Neal is one of the premier tackles in college football, and he's a force, and he's a force that we've got to reckon with.
In the season opener, O'Neal and the Cowboys proved to be a force, getting a win over a 12th-ranked Washington Huskies team, and O'Neal continued that dominance throughout the season. The numbers were slightly down compared to last year. A knee injury slowed him down, but you couldn't replace his impact. Coordinators avoided going to his side, and double teams were the norm for O'Neal. Offensively, they had lost some personnel, and QB was a weakness, but an All-American season from Thurman Thomas helped make up for that. He was joined on the All-American team by O'Neal, and with an 8-1 start to the season, it looked like OSU would again be in national championship contention. A stunning upset at the hands of Iowa State changed everything. The next week they took on Oklahoma, the Bedlam Ice Bowl if you will, and in freezing conditions, OSU failed to get on the board, so their season would only culminate in a return to the Gator Bowl. Oklahoma State was reeling, and Florida State held O'Neal in check. The Cowboys couldn't stop the run. They were handed their 3rd consecutive loss, and O'Neal finished his senior year empty-handed. And while it was disappointing, O'Neal took pride in being part of something bigger.
A lot of people go to universities that are already established, and they can say, well, I was on the team that kept the ball rolling. And right now, when they look back at Oklahoma State, they can say, well, hey, Leslie O'Neal was on that team that started the 11, 9 wins, 8 wins, that type of deal.
His 4 years were over. O'Neal was heading to the NFL. Still slender, but at about 250 pounds, he looked more like a defensive end. And to many NFL scouts, there was no better pass rusher in college football than Leslie O'Neal.
San Diego selects defensive end Leslie O'Neal from Oklahoma State.
You know, death, taxes, and the fact that the Chargers come into the draft in need of defensive help. You can put money on it, they draft defense. Will it finally pay off?
First round, 8th overall, the Chargers selected the OSU product. They had even traded up to get him. It was time for owner Alex Spanos and head coach Don Coryell to address the defense. For years, San Diego and their Air Coryell offense had been one of the most dangerous in NFL history, relying on outscoring their opponent. But QB Dan Fouts was getting older. Tight end Kellen Winslow was breaking down. They couldn't bank on that strategy much longer. They had one of the worst pass defenses in the league in '85, so they drafted O'Neal to put some pressure on the quarterback. They had another up-and-coming pass rusher in third-year Lee Williams. And Gil Byrd provided some playmaking in the secondary. There was still a lot of work to do, but it was a foundation. O'Neal held out for 2.5 weeks. It wasn't anything major, he just wanted to meet the owner. Once Spanos and the rookie set a time, it was smooth sailing. Minutes later, and O'Neal was signed. $1.7 million over 4 years. He showed he was worth every penny.
Leslie O'Neal, 7th player picked in the first round of the last draft. An undersized defensive end, but you can't block him, he's so quick.
In his second career game, he had his first interception and first forced fumble.
Intercepted. It's picked up by Leslie O'Neal.
2 weeks later, he racked up 3 sacks.
Fumble ball. Chargers have it. It's San Diego's ball. Leslie O'Neal.
Against division rival Kansas City, his first career touchdown. In Week 11, he dominated the Dallas Cowboys.
That's Leslie O'Neal. Leslie O'Neal got there, number 91, with Leslie O'Neal again. Nobody touched it. And that's a fumble. Leslie O'Neal caused another one.
O'Neal recorded a career-high 5 sacks. The Chargers were losing every game, but they had struck gold on the D-line. O'Neal looked like a star. So did Lee Williams. It looked like they had found their duo of the future. Except one of them wouldn't even make it to the end of the season. In a Week 13 matchup with the Colts in Indy, O'Neal destroyed his knee. Bone damage, cartilage damage, MCL, ACL, completely torn. At the time of his injury, he was the Chargers' leading tackler and top 5 in the league in sacks. But his season was over after 13 games, finishing his rookie campaign with 82 total tackles, 12.5 sacks, 5 forced fumbles, and a touchdown. Although his season was cut short, O'Neal still set a rookie record for sacks. He had done more than enough to earn the Defensive Rookie of the Year award. But it didn't get much worse than the injury he suffered. He wouldn't be back in 1987, that was for sure. A lot of people thought he might not be back at all, and at least at times, O'Neal was one of those people. And if he somehow did manage to return, would he even be able to get close to his pre-injury form? So many questions and so much uncertainty. Over the next year, he underwent 6 surgeries, and those were the easy part. Rehab would be the real challenge. Did he have what it took to complete the grueling process? He knew it didn't matter. He had to. October of 1988, Leslie O'Neal is cleared to play, back on the field for the first time in 22 months. But what version of Leslie O'Neal were you going to get? While he had been dominant at some points of his rookie season, a common criticism since he was drafted was that he just wasn't big enough to contend with NFL O-linemen. A barely 250-pound defensive lineman at that time was a rarity. But what he lacked in weight, he made up for in speed. His quickness off the line was his X factor. No one could keep up with his outside rush. Except how's that rush going to look with multiple repaired ligaments in his left knee?
Berline had it knocked away. Is it a fumble or an incomplete pass? Leslie O'Neal, 91, coming from the blind side.
It was only fitting that his first sack in nearly 2 years was off a speed rush. Repaired knee and all, he still had it. Over the next 4 weeks, O'Neal recorded 3 more sacks. With each game, he looked more and more comfortable. He didn't make his debut until week 7 and still finished second on the team in sacks. The Chargers were still searching for ways to win, so it would be another rough year for Bolts fans. But seeing number 91 wreaking havoc again was a small consolation, as O'Neal wrapped up his comeback season with 28 total tackles, 4 sacks, and a forced fumble. San Diego was entering a completely new era. Don Coryell had resigned midway through O'Neill's rookie year. Both Dan Fouts and Kellen Winslow decided to hang it up after the '87 season. This all culminated in San Diego fielding one of the worst offenses in football in '88, but they were slowly seeing their defense come together. Lee Williams was a Pro Bowler. Gil Byrd was a ball hawk. And they had a pretty impressive linebacking corps, with guys like Gary Plummer and Billy Ray Smith. They beefed up the D-line with incoming rookie Burt Grossman. And with a fully recovered Leslie O'Neal, the Chargers were ready to get back on the winning track. San Diego started the '89 season with a new coach, Dan Henning. They were still looking for a franchise QB, so this year fans would get a little Billy Joe Tolliver and a little more Jim McMahon. A breakout from second-year receiver Anthony Miller gave them at least one consistent target, and on the ground, new rookie running back Marion Butts showed promise. Finally, they had a new outside linebacker, Leslie O'Neal. It just made sense. Keep your speed rusher on the outside in pass rush position, and you still run out of the woods with that knee. You didn't want him getting hammered in the trenches. It took O'Neal a little time to get acclimated, but those sacks started pouring in.
We told you about him, there he is. Leslie O'Neal, big number 91, hits Schrader again in trouble, he's sacked this time. Leslie O'Neal with the biggest play of the game.
The knee injury was a thing of the past. O'Neal replicated his rookie total with 12.5 sacks, second on the team behind Lee Williams, and one of 3 Chargers with double-digit sacks. Turned out Burt Grossman had a nose for the QB too, and for O'Neal, it wasn't just sacks. That speed off the edge with his play recognition, Leslie O'Neal was back, and it was scary. He found his way into every backfield.
They give to Merrill Hodge. What a pop he took on the right side. That was Leslie O'Neal.
Coaches, players, and fans alike couldn't ignore O'Neal's impact, voting him to his first career Pro Bowl. The position switch had paid off. The defense was vastly improved, top 10 in the NFL, but they had trouble closing out games. The offense had even more trouble scoring. A subpar passing attack with an inconsistent run game meant a losing season for San Diego. However, in his first full season back, Leslie O'Neal racked up 96 total tackles, 12.5 sacks, and 3 forced fumbles. Entering into a new decade, the Chargers had beefed up their defense even more. USC linebacker Junior Seau had landed in their lap during the draft. O'Neal, however, was a free agent. The organization was still wary about his knee, and the two sides didn't see eye to eye on a long-term deal. So they worked out something shorter. 2 more years in San Diego, and 2 years for O'Neal to prove that he was worthy of a long-term commitment. But even if he did, would he want to stay in San Diego?
San Diego's in somewhat the same situation as the Jets. Are they making progress?
Oh, they're going backwards. They're going backwards, and that's what's frightening everyone down in San Diego.
The San Diego defense was one of the best in the league a year ago, and even they have struggled.
Oh, they gave up 4 touchdowns last week to a Pittsburgh team that hadn't scored a touchdown all season. They're pointing fingers at one another. They're saying there's a lack of enthusiasm.
About a month into the season, and the Chargers were heading towards another disappointing year. A 1-4 start and an underachieving defense. Except for O'Neal, he was playing better than ever.
Brooks gets away from it. No, he didn't have the ball, and Leslie O'Neal knew who did.
He is met by Leslie O'Neal.
The pass rush was a given. The run support was much improved, and he'd even knocked down a few passes. Leslie, the linebacker, was all over the field.
Leslie O'Neal is unique, and here's a guy that can do just about everything. And the defensive coaches have a scheme that takes advantage of Leslie's talents. He's plays up, but he rushes the passer most of the time. There's another guy, his motor's going full speed all the time. He's a wild man.
Sure, he was more of a stand-up defensive end than a true outside linebacker, but who cares what the results he was producing?
He's a relentless rusher. Feels like he's getting back to the form he had a couple of years ago before the injury.
O'Neal took over as the resident sack master in San Diego. A then career-high 13.5 sacks was good for 5th most in the NFL. Quarterbacks couldn't avoid him. Most running backs couldn't even outrun him, and he found himself making another trip to the Pro Bowl. The defense picked it up as the year went on. Unfortunately, there were still so many holes on the offense. The biggest being Billy Joe Tolliver. He just wasn't going to be their franchise QB, and without that, the Chargers would stay stuck in neutral, turning in their third consecutive 6-win season, as O'Neal finished his year with 81 total tackles, 13.5 sacks, and 2 forced fumbles. On top of another losing record, there was controversy near the end of the season. Frustrations were boiling over for O'Neal. In mid-December, he spoke his mind to the media. He felt the organization showed favoritism to certain players for certain reasons, specifically around Pro Bowl promotion, which was a little ironic since days later O'Neal was the only Chargers defender voted to the Pro Bowl. But to give him the benefit of the doubt, maybe he was referring more to Gil Byrd, who had just wrapped up his third straight 7-interception season with 0 Pro Bowls to show for it. O'Neal hated losing too, and he became critical of his own teammates when talking to the media. Probably not the best way to go about it, but he felt it had to be done, and as you'd expect, his teammates weren't too appreciative of that. Some of them had their own things to say about O'Neal, saying that he thinks he's bigger than the team and deserves a bit of a reality check. Fast forward to training camp, and O'Neal was feuding with more teammates. This time it was Burt Grossman. The Chargers had moved Lee Williams to an interior lineman to make room for Grossman on the outside after drafting him. Williams never liked it, and neither did O'Neal. He didn't think Grossman could have the impact on the outside that Williams did, and that meant O'Neal would be dealing with more double teams. Grossman said, "What double teams? O'Neal doesn't get double teamed. He's just a guy that has to be upset about something." So San Diego's PR team definitely had their hands full, and as a fan, you wanted to believe in the Chargers, but it really looked like they were imploding.
Yeah, there's no question that this season has not been a good season for the San Diego defense. The offense of San Diego should produce better than a 1-6 record, but the defense has played like a 1-6 team, and Dan Henning knows it.
Things weren't looking any better for the Chargers in '91. They were 1-8 going into their bye week, and the defense that had been their strength for the past few years was now a weakness. An unhappy Lee Williams had been traded to the Oilers, and that really did a number on their pass rush. Grossman underperformed and would never again produce the way he did in his first 2 seasons. Maybe O'Neal was right. Teams could dedicate more blockers to him, and it led to the worst season of his career. And more losing, with low production, led to high frustration. But they were the frustrations of a competitor, and some of his teammates still had good things to say.
He doesn't make a mistake. He's a technician. He's a great player, and he leads by example. And he's a player that I looked at and I learned from.
O'Neal did lead the team in sacks, but it was his lowest total since his comeback year, and nearly half of them came in the season finale, a meaningless game for a Chargers team buried at the bottom of the division, with O'Neal closing out a disappointing 1991 season with 68 total tackles, 9 sacks, and 2 forced fumbles. So, a terrible season in San Diego, and a year of O'Neal in the headlines criticizing his teammates and the organization. But of all people, Burt Grossman gave some actual insight on O'Neal's frustrations. When O'Neal blew out his knee, he didn't have full support of the organization. He was criticized for how long it was taking him to return, and some thought he was just going to take his money and run. So when he proved them wrong and came back, he held on to the fact that his own employer doubted him and questioned his integrity. If they didn't trust him, how could he trust them? And that's what O'Neal wanted the focus to be, his fights back from injury and his return to Pro Bowl form, not him calling out teammates or criticizing the organization. But that does bring up the next issue at hand. O'Neal's 2-year extension was up. Whether or not he agreed with it, there was a negative perception around him, and he was coming off the worst year of his career. However, he was in his prime, and still one of the best defensive players in the league. So naturally, that should equal smooth contract negotiations. Well, actually, it was really smooth. O'Neal was under contract with the Chargers by late July. The catch was that it was only 1 year. And while O'Neal hated all the losing, he'd give the Chargers one last chance after the changes they had made. They had a new head coach in Bobby Ross. They had a new defensive coordinator in Bill Arnsparger, and he retooled everything. The Chargers spent their first-round pick on a big pass rusher, Tennessee's Chris Mims. Junior Seau had played out of position his first 2 years, so Arnsparger moved him back to the outside. Then he put O'Neal's hand back in the dirt, returning him to his more natural defensive end position. But 4 weeks into the season, and all those changes seemed pointless for a winless Chargers team. Then a switch flipped.
Tomczak pumps once, and it's too late. Leslie O'Neal
Pass blocking is there. Now it runs out. Leslie O'Neal, number 91.
Pulls it back, and then he is pulled down by Leslie O'Neal.
Watch O'Neal here. Same problem. Little move, little shake, uppercut.
Four-man rush, and he is smothered.
O'Neal again.
Leslie O'Neal, that is his 4th sack of the ball game.
O'Neal sacked the quarterback in each of his next 5 games. In the Chargers' final 12 games, O'Neal had 15 sacks, and he missed one of those games. For the season, he racked up a career-high 17, most in the AFC and second in the NFL, the greatest sack artist in franchise history.
Nice guy, though.
And then getting wrapped up from behind by Leslie O'Neal, getting right over the top.
He now just passed Gary Big Hands Johnson as the all-time sack leader with 67.5.
The Chargers' dominant pass rush was back, and the defense was one of the stingiest in the league.
And they all give credit to new defensive coordinator Bill Arnsperger, the wily tactician, a great teacher. He puts his players in the right place. He gives them a confidence out there. They believe in Bill Arnsperger, their new defensive coordinator.
Junior Seau was first-team All-Pro and runner-up for DPOY. O'Neal was back in the Pro Bowl and had his own top 5 finish in DPOY voting. Even Gil Byrd was finally getting some respect. But everyone knew the defense was good. They had just underachieved. The offense, however, had been stagnant for years. Not this year. The Chargers put their faith in the backfield, a 3-headed attack with Marion Butts, Rod Bernstein, and Ronnie Harmon. And when they did air it out, Anthony Miller was there for the big play. The Chargers went from winless to red hot. After their 0-4 start, they won 11 of their final 12. They also won their division. And finally, Chargers fans were getting playoff football for the first time in a decade.
It's a fantastic feeling, and I think more than anything, I'm very happy for all of our players, particularly our older players, and some of the people that have been in this organization for a long time that haven't seen that happen. I'm very pleased for
The wild card brought division rival Kansas City, a team that had already beat San Diego in both of their meetings. But in his first playoff game, Leslie O'Neal made sure it wouldn't be a sweep.
Williams, and can't get away from Leslie O'Neal. Craig, here comes O'Neal. Fumble!
O'Neal looked virtually unblockable. Dave Craig couldn't make a pass without O'Neal breathing down his neck. Running backs could barely make it past the line of scrimmage.
Barry Ward on the delay, and O'Neal closing in. He's had a monster of a day.
And O'Neal was making Pro Bowl tackle John Alt look like a backup.
It looks like they're going to have to get John Alt some help to block him. I've seen times when John Alt can block the best, but he can't get it done today.
He even added an interception to his stat line.
Craig intercepted by O'Neal.
Finishing the game with a pick, 2 sacks, and a team-high 6 tackles. The Chargers dominated. The Chiefs couldn't even get on the board, and San Diego had their first playoff win since 1982. Then came the divisional, and the Chargers would learn exactly how the Chiefs felt. Shut out in a 31-point beatdown at the hands of the Dolphins. A rough way to go out, but finally they had hope, as O'Neal wrapped up his career year with 78 total tackles, 17 sacks, and 1 forced fumble. Although they didn't reach the ultimate goal, this was the direction they needed to go in. And not only had O'Neal played great, there were no locker room issues. Reports were actually saying that he was getting along with teammates he once criticized. Maybe winning is a cure-all, but that's only if you can keep it up. Leslie O'Neal probably felt he should be getting a big payday after the season he just had. In a way he was, but it was the franchise tag, so he couldn't weigh his options. And O'Neal wasn't too happy about it, except he was more upset with the league bargaining agreement than his team. O'Neal wanted to be an unrestricted free agent. The franchise tag gave him no autonomy. He wanted to be a Charger, but he wanted to be able to negotiate a deal. After staging a holdout, he got what he wanted. San Diego rescinded the tag, except it was late August. The season started in a couple weeks. Teams already had their money tied up. O'Neal had the freedom to negotiate, but no one else had the financial freedom. So just days later, he was back with the Chargers. 3 years, $9 million. Better than the franchise tag, but probably not as good as it could have been. Nonetheless, he was now the highest paid member on a defense which was unexpectedly weaker. After 2 straight Pro Bowl seasons, a knee injury forced Gil Bert into retirement, a huge hit to the secondary. Bert Grossman would miss almost half the year. O'Neal couldn't replicate last season, but the Chargers got their money's worth. Another double-digit sack year put him among the league's elite.
When you look at the last year and a half, O'Neal has 21 sacks. No one better. Clyde Simmons, Anthony Smith, the Eagle and the Raider. Neil Smith, 19 and a half. O'Neal's there with the elite.
Yet he still wasn't satisfied. As good as he was playing, he felt he missed a lot of chances to be better. And yes, he rubbed his teammates the wrong way when he called them out, but he'd be the first one to admit his own underperformance. He was still a little bitter about his deal too. He couldn't help but think that he could have gotten something better if he would have had a chance to test the market. He was probably bitter about the season as well, because as was becoming the norm in San Diego, it was another slow start for the Chargers, dropping 4 of their first 6 games. The defense was good, but they weren't as good as the year before. The offense continued its unsuccessful search for a franchise QB, with both Stan Humphries and John Freeze seeing action. They were able to turn the season respectable, but they didn't make a run like last year, and 8 wins just wasn't going to cut it. Just like that, the Chargers again were on the outside looking in, as O'Neal ended year 8 with 56 total tackles, 12 sacks, and 2 forced fumbles. So the Chargers went from division champs to missing the playoffs in a year. They were much better than they had played last year, but going into '94, no one really knew what to expect.
The Chargers come into this first game a mystery team. They have 19 players missing from the '93 campaign, a disappointing season when they finished at 8-8.
The Chargers had solved the mystery which had been plaguing them for years. They didn't have to overcome a bad start, because they didn't lose a game until week 8, the hottest team in football over the first half of the season. They had a second-year back named Natron Means who was running all over defenses. And while the verdict was still out on Stan Humphries, he was having the best year of his career. On the other side of the ball, the defense had a lot of new faces, but number 55 was still patrolling the field, and number 91 with the orange visor was still tracking down quarterbacks.
Meyer will be dragged down from behind on the terrific outside move by Leslie O'Neal.
This is why he's the all-time leading sacker for the San Diego Chargers.
He will be sacked by Leslie O'Neal back at the 17-yard line.
That's number 91. He was looking all the way. He just took his left hand and just knocked it out of there.
One move and O'Neal was in the backfield. Running on the Chargers was easier said than done.
He just gets the penetration, goes through the inside, disrupts things in the backfield. Nobody can play as quickly on the football field and on that defensive line as Leslie O'Neal can play.
There was also Chris Mims, Sean Lee, and Reuben Davis, a dominant D-line who had dubbed themselves the Border Patrol. And for Leslie O'Neal, it was yet another season among the league leaders in sacks without anyone really realizing. He didn't seek out fanfare, he wasn't the most marketable, and publicity only found him when he had something to say about the team. But most impressive in his consistency was the way he did it. He wasn't big on the study and preparation. Most guys would be watching film. O'Neal was probably just lining up dominoes. During the games, it was instinct. He knew himself and had some of the quickest reaction time in the NFL. Whatever you threw at him, he had a counter. You just can't teach that, and you can't replace it either. O'Neal was a Pro Bowl mainstay at this point. In '94, the 30-year-old end was a second-team All-Pro as well. And perhaps his biggest impact is the attention he commanded. Even if he wasn't making the play, the double teams he constantly faced would free up someone to make it.
With me, John Madden, as usual. And John, first of all, let's talk Chargers.
They started out as a real hot team, and then they kind of cooled off, and I think they just have to start playing championship football.
The team hit a rough patch mid-season. After a 6-0 start, they won just 3 of their next 5. Their grasp on the division was slipping, but they avoided a collapse. With a convincing win over the Jets in Week 16, San Diego was back on top, AFC West champions, making a return to the playoffs. 2 years ago, Miami humiliated them. Now they would have a chance for redemption. It didn't start well for San Diego, and they were down 21-6 at halftime. But they fought back. They went ahead with seconds left, and with a little luck, they were moving on. The AFC Championship was next. The Pittsburgh Steelers were in between them and a Super Bowl appearance. O'Neal didn't put up big numbers, but that's because the Steelers were doing everything to make sure he didn't, and he still found his way into the backfield. Defense was the name of the game on a rainy day at Three Rivers, but San Diego made the plays down the stretch. It was already the best season in franchise history. For the first time ever, the Chargers were going to the Super Bowl. Unfortunately, in the big game, the Chargers ran into a buzzsaw that was the San Francisco 49ers. It was an offensive onslaught they just weren't ready for, and the team left Miami with nothing but memories. And Leslie O'Neal wrapped up the '94 season with 60 total tackles, 12.5 sacks, and 3 forced fumbles. The Chargers lost the Super Bowl, but the city still threw a parade. After all, they had treated Chargers fans to the most successful season they had ever been a part of. But they got hit with a big loss shortly after the season. Not on the field, but on the sideline. Bill Arnsparger retired. A lot of players wanted linebackers coach Willie Shaw to get promoted, but Bobby Ross brought in the more experienced Dave Adolph. And through no fault of his own, he was instantly on Leslie O'Neal's bad side. '95 started and the Chargers got off to another hot start, looking just like the Super Bowl favorite they were touted to be. Then Natron Means injured his knee. He missed 6 games, and even when he was on the field, his production was nowhere close to last year. And without the threat of his running, the passing game suffered. San Diego went from a top 5 offense to the bottom half of the league. Fortunately, even with a new coordinator, they still had their defense to bail them out. Seau was doing his usual damage, and a second-year man in the secondary named Rodney Harrison was flashing some potential. And obviously O'Neal kept getting to the quarterback.
From the 25-yard line, Leslie O'Neal.
Leslie O'Neal is one of the best defensive linemen in the history of this franchise.
It was his 4th straight season with at least 12 sacks. He had a 4-sack performance against Seattle in Week 8. Then 2 games later, a sack against the Chiefs made him the 10th player to officially be granted entry into the 100-sack club. But even the defense was up and down, and with 5 weeks left, San Diego was 3 games below 500. If they wanted to return to the playoffs, they couldn't lose. And they didn't. The Chargers ran the table. O'Neal had 5 sacks in that 5-game stretch, and with a 9-7 record, San Diego snuck into the wild card. It was a new playoff opponent in the Indianapolis Colts. For 3 quarters, the teams went back and forth trading blows, but things unraveled in the 4th. Indy reached pay dirt twice in the final frame, and San Diego ran out of gas. A return to the Super Bowl was off the table, but the always productive O'Neal finished year 10 with 48 total tackles, 12.5 sacks, and 4 forced fumbles. It had been yet another Pro Bowl season for Leslie O'Neal, but his contract was up. It was no secret that he had been fed up with all the losing over the years. He had dropped plenty of hints throughout the season about wanting to continue his career elsewhere. So the Chargers said, go ahead. They didn't even open negotiations with their franchise sack leader, slamming the door on a decade in San Diego. In early March, O'Neal signed on with the St. Louis Rams. He had caused some headaches during his time in San Diego, but as he'd say many times, he didn't care if he was liked. This was his job, and on the field he was there to win, which made St. Louis an interesting choice. The Rams hadn't had a winning season since the 80s, but maybe he was betting on potential. Their 7-9 finish in '95 was their best of the decade. They had added talented yet troubled running back Lawrence Phillips, and receiver Isaac Bruce was coming off a monster year. On defense, their biggest strength was their D-line, so adding Leslie O'Neal to that could only bring good results, right?
Well, Leslie doesn't normally talk to the media, but he came out after the Pittsburgh game and says, flat out, I haven't been playing well this season.
New team, older player, who knows? But '96 was not a good showing from Leslie O'Neal. He'd missed the Pro Bowl for the first time since '91. He'd record his lowest sack total excluding his comeback season. And for the first time in his career, he wouldn't force a single fumble. Although it wasn't all bad. At 32, he played more snaps than any other player on the defense, and he still led the team in QB pressures. It just seemed like the motor or desire was burning out, and the Rams weren't winning either. Even worse, they were held back by their defense. one of the worst units in the NFL. O'Neal left San Diego for greener pastures, and they won 2 more games than the Rams in '96. They didn't make the playoffs though, and neither did the Rams. And O'Neal ended his first season in St. Louis with 54 total tackles, 7 sacks, and 3 fumble recoveries. Going into the following season, the Rams had a new head coach, bringing in Dick Vermeil following a long stint in the broadcast booth. And one of the first things he did was challenge Leslie O'Neal. He basically told him to stop complaining, be more positive, and contribute like you're supposed to. So that's what O'Neal did.
Throughout the day, here comes again. Leslie O'Neal hit him from behind.
The 12-year veteran had 4 sacks in their first 5 games. He wreaked havoc on the Chiefs in Week 9 with a 3-sack performance.
O'Neal again gets to Gerbach. Oh, Leslie O'Neal! Put on a show, big man!
And a few weeks later, the 33-year-old returned a fumble 66 yards to the house. This was the O'Neal the Rams thought they were getting.
And Marty Schottenheimer told me yesterday that O'Neal might be the best ever to play the position.
And the defense as a whole played better. Not great, but better. Except now the offense took a step back. And after a 2-2 start, the Rams dropped 8 straight. And with 5 wins, it was an even worse finish than last year. But O'Neal had at least redeemed himself, finishing the season with 43 total tackles, 10 sacks, 1 forced fumble, 1 interception, and a touchdown. O'Neal had showed he still had gas left in the tank, but he was set to turn 34. How much was really left? The Rams weren't going in the right direction, and if they wanted to build their future, they had to free up some cash, so they'd choose to release O'Neal, and the pass rusher was back on the market. Leslie O'Neal went back to the AFC West, not the Chargers, but the Chiefs. And for the first time in his career, he took on more of a specialized role. O'Neal had always been an every down guy. The Rams wanted him as more of a specialist, but O'Neal refused. It's part of the reason they let him go. He still wanted to play as much as he could, but he was willing to take a step back. Then injuries forced him into a bigger role, and every once in a while, he'd turn back the clock.
Jeff George has to scramble. Oh, good grief. Leslie O'Neal nearly took him apart.
So the sacks were lower than usual, but it was still something to add to the career total as he climbed the all-time list. Teams had little time to pass on the Chiefs, but they were running on them no problem. And winning just kept eluding Leslie O'Neal. After 2 losing seasons in St. Louis, he had another in Kansas City, as he ended his first year as a Chief with 45 total tackles, 4.5 sacks, and 3 forced fumbles. With a healthier team, O'Neal transitioned into more of a specialized role in '99. You knew he was nearing the end of his career, so you just had to appreciate while you still could.
Got him a sack. Back at the 36, Leslie O'Neal. And I am with that sack. Old Leslie O'Neal goes by LT. And Leslie O'Neal picks up his 133rd sack of his career. Now in 6th place in NFL history.
For his age, Big Les was playing his part, putting effort into run support and trying to get into the playoffs at least one last time. With a 9-5 record, that was looking like a possibility. But the Chiefs dropped their final 2, and with a gut-wrenching loss to the Raiders in the season finale, their season was over, as O'Neal wrapped up year 14 with 28 total tackles, 8 tackles for loss, and 5.5 sacks. Over 200 games played, over 130 total sacks, Leslie O'Neal had done more than most, and after an offseason of contemplation, he decided it was enough, quietly retiring in the summer of 2000. Years later, he would be inducted into the Chargers Hall of Fame, one of the greatest pass rushers of all time. So should that make Leslie O'Neal a Pro Football Hall of Famer? Well, remember John Alt, the Pro Bowl tackle that O'Neal dominated back in the '92 wildcard? He went against all the greats, and to him, O'Neal was the best he ever faced. But that's the problem when looking at his case for the Hall of Fame. He was really never seen as the best. In college, he was incredible, but a lot of people didn't even consider him the best D lineman in his conference, often citing Oklahoma's Tony Casillas. He looked like the best player on the Chargers as a rookie. Then he had the injury, and Lee Williams asserted himself as the top D lineman. When Williams was traded, Junior Seau quickly became their best defender. Even in the sack department, O'Neal never led the league once, and while he was great, He played in the same era as all-time talents like Reggie White and Bruce Smith. So it's not that he's undeserving, it's just hard to make a case for someone who was statistically never the best, but consistency and production matters. Not to mention he did most of his damage on a surgically repaired knee, a surgery that was done in the 80s. And as of 2026, he's still the Chargers' all-time sack leader by a large margin, and has 132.5 for his career, the 6th most in history at the time of his retirement. However, he probably didn't do himself any favors with his outspokenness. He rubbed a lot of people the wrong way, but that was Leslie O'Neal. He didn't care if he was liked. He wasn't going to do it any other way but his own. And once again, before we end it off, I just want to take a second to shout out channel members. Really appreciate the support in helping make these videos possible. But that's it for today's episode on Leslie O'Neal. Hope you enjoyed it, and make sure to subscribe for more videos like this one. If you liked it, check out this one on another Big 8/Big 12 legend, or this one on one of his Chargers teammates. Thanks for watching, and see you next time.